Let's suppose that a city tour transaction has been created to represent the tours that are offered to the travel agent's customers for visiting the different tourist attractions of a given city. It's a two-level transaction. In the first level, in addition to the name of the tour, we specify its country and city, and the estimated duration of the entire tour, which is the sum of the estimated visiting times for each attraction. The sublevel indicates the tourist attractions included in the tour, for which it was necessary to define a group of subtypes, since in the first level, we need to specify the country and city of the city tour. In addition, attractions have a country and city, which must be checked to make sure they match those of the tour. Note that City Tour Attraction ID is a subtype of Attraction ID. So it's like the same attribute and therefore will be a foreign key in the second level table of City Tour. That table will also have the secondary attribute City Tour Attraction Duration to specify how long the visit to that attraction is estimated to last. The pattern Work with a City Tour has been applied, and also to the attractions, in order to work more comfortably, and some data has been loaded. For example, note that for Paris, only 2 city tours have been created. The first one has the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower, and the second one only has the Eiffel Tower. Suppose that when the back office user is working with the tourist attractions to enter a new one into the system, for example, Notre Dame Cathedral, this one should be automatically added to all the city tours corresponding to the city of the attraction, in this case, Paris. With a fixed duration for the visit of 120 minutes, which can later be modified. How do we get this behavior? In short, as soon as a new attraction is inserted through this transaction, it's required that a new line with that attraction is automatically inserted for all city tours that have the same country and city with a duration of 120 minutes. Then, on after insert, that is, immediately after the new attraction has been inserted in the attraction table, we'll call a procedure to which we'll pass the identifier of that entered attraction, and that will be in charge of inserting the line for the city tours that it finds with the same country and same city. When we turn on the business component property of the transaction, 2 business components will be automatically created in the KB and not just one, as we might think. The first is the expected one, with a structure like the one displayed. So, if City Tour 4 has 2 lines, the structure of a variable of the City Tour business component data type will be like the one represented here, where the last element, attraction, is a collection of lines. Each line will correspond, in turn, to a structured data item. With what structure? That of the business component City Tour Attraction, which is the one for each line of the transaction. That is, while the business component corresponding to the transaction as a whole is the one that will allow us to perform the insert, update, and delete operations on the database, the one created for the lines is only to be used as a data structure. These other operations will not be allowed. And this may seem confusing at first. But just as when we want to insert a new line through the City Tour transaction screen, we must first instantiate the header, then insert the line, and finally select the global confirm. The same will happen with the business components. To work with their lines, for example, by adding 1, we will have to work with the header and its lines, adding the line, and then doing the desired operation on everything, that is, on the transaction's BC variable. So, To insert a new attraction for the city tour 2, we will need a city tour variable of the business component data type of the city tour transaction. After applying the load operation, we obtain the variable loaded with the data from the database. In this case, the header and its single line. Then, as we'll need to add a new line, we define an attraction variable of the business component data type corresponding to the lines. After loading the values of its elements, we only have to add this structure to the collection of lines. This is done with the add method applied to the attraction collection, no less. Once the information is as we want it in the city tour variable, we perform the update operation on it. Because the city tour of ID 2 already existed, and we just want to modify it by adding the line. This operation will be the one that actually inserts the line into the database. Looking at the procedure implemented, we'll understand everything. The attraction ID is received in the variable attraction ID. We're iterating in the forEach command for all city tours in the country and city of the attraction received. Here, it's clear why the procedure has to be called after the attraction has been inserted in the attraction table. Otherwise, we will not find its country and city to use this filter. City tour is a variable of the city tour business component data type. It's loaded from the city tour ID found in the forEach command. We just have to add the line with the attraction. To do so, we'll define a variable of the business component data type corresponding to the lines. We'll create a new memory space for this variable. And we assign the storable elements. This is the attraction ID and the duration of the visit. And then we just have to add that line to the city tour line collection. Finally, we perform the update operation that will return true if it was successful, and in that case, select commit. Then it goes on to the next iteration. Now let's look at how to remove lines through the business component. The work with attractions contains the Notre Dame Cathedral that was previously inserted. If we go to the city tours, we'll see that there are two in Paris that contain it. This one and this one. So, what we want now is to be able to delete the attraction. Normally, this would not be allowed because of the referential integrity check, to confirm that there are no city tours that contain this attraction to allow its deletion. So when pressing delete, we want to first delete all those lines of city tours where the attraction is located, and then go on to effectively delete the attraction. We confirm, and we can see now that it was deleted from the city tour, and also from the one we had seen before. Question is how to implement it. From the attraction transaction in delete mode, we want to delete the attraction and before the data is validated, that is, before the referential integrity checks are made, we'll call a procedure, passing it the attraction identifier. And that procedure is the one that will be in charge of deleting all the lines of city tours that contain it. So how do we do this? To delete a line using the transaction, we have to first load the city tour, which will be in update mode, then delete the line, and finally press confirm so that the deletion is actually carried out in the database. It'll be similar here. To delete the Notre Dame Cathedral from the City Tour 2, in a variable of the City Tour Business Component data type, we load the structure using the load method. And then we delete the line from the attraction collection. How? With the remove by key method. As its name indicates, this method will search the collection for the item corresponding to the indicated key value. In this case, that of ID 5, which is from the Notre Dame Cathedral. This deletion has been done only in memory, and now it has to be impacted on the database. To do so, we have to update the city tour, and that's why the update method is used. Of course, save could have also been used as well. All of this is equivalent to having pressed the confirm button on the transaction. If we now go to see how the procedure is implemented in Genexus, the variable attraction ID receives the attraction identifier to be deleted. A for each command is used to search in the city tour lines for one corresponding to that attraction ID. If it finds it, in a city tour variable of the business component data type, corresponding to the transaction, we load the city tour ID corresponding to that line. And then we apply the remove by key method to the collection of attractions of that city tour, in order to delete that of the attraction ID received by parameter. Then we perform the update. If it was successful, we commit. In this way, we make sure that we've deleted all the city tour lines that had that attraction among their data. Then, when the execution of this procedure is finished, the control returns here. The validation of the corresponding attraction is made, and now it will not have any related data, and it's deleted without giving any kind of integrity failure. This is the last case to be studied, which is how we update lines of a transaction through the business component. If we did it through the transaction, in this case, we would edit the tour ID 2. Suppose we're interested in changing the duration of the visit to the Eiffel Tower from 260 minutes to 200. And once we do this, all that remains is to confirm, so that the update can take place. We'll have to do something like that through the business component. Load it, modify the line, and update. We then load the city tour variable with the city tour of ID 2. We must access the item in the collection that corresponds to attraction 3. To this end, the getByKey method is used. When applied to the attraction collection, that is, to the transaction lines, it will return a direct reference to that memory position. Therefore, it's assigned to the attraction variable of the business component data type corresponding to the lines. In this way, the attraction variable will not be a copy of that line, but will be exactly that line. Now the only thing left to do is to change the city tour attraction duration element of that variable. And this will have a direct effect on the city tour variable. This has to be impacted in the database, and for this purpose, we perform the business component update operation. Note that, as a consequence, not only is the record corresponding to that line updated in the database, but the city tour variable is also updated. And the city tour duration element corresponding to a formula in the transaction header that added up the visiting times of the lines is also refreshed in the variable. Let's now see how to implement the modification of lines through business components in the application. Positioned on Work with Attractions, if we edit a certain attraction, for example, the Eiffel Tower, and select the tab that shows all the city tours in which that attraction is located, we'll see that it shows, among other data, the duration in minutes of the visit to that attraction. in each of the city tours. We wanted to make it possible to change that duration from here, by adding or subtracting minutes in all the city tours it's on. So, let's say we want to add 10 minutes to each one. This screen is shown to the user where he or she indicates that he or she wants to add 10 minutes, and we see that this addition has been made. What was done in the background? Each of these two city tours was accessed, starting with the first one, accessing the line corresponding to this attraction, and adding 10 minutes to the estimated time. And the same thing was done for this one. That is, one line of each of these two city tours had to be modified. If we want to see how to implement it in Genexus, in the Work with Attraction, we added an action, Modified Duration, to the tab corresponding to the city tours of the attraction. Its code is the invocation to the web panel of that name, passing it the attraction identifier. And when this web panel is finished running, a refresh is done to show in the grid the refreshed data. Let's see that web panel. This is the one that asks the user in this variable to change the number of minutes, and what it does is invoke a procedure that actually changes the corresponding data. The procedure needs to receive the attraction ID and the minutes to add or subtract to that attraction in the various city tours it's on. Let's see how to schedule that procedure. We can see it receives the information in these two variables. And in a for-each command, it runs through the attractions of the city tours, filtering by the attraction received by parameter. Then, for each of the records it finds, what it does is load the city tour in question in the city tour business component variable. In the attraction variable of the type city tour attraction, that is, the business component corresponding to the lines, it obtains the item of the attraction collection corresponding to the attraction ID key. Then the duration is changed. The city tour attraction duration element for that item, adding the number of minutes received by parameter to the value it had. Next, an update is performed and committed. Here's an overview of what has been seen regarding how to insert, delete, and change a line in a two-level business component. In all cases, the operation used is update, since it was assumed that the header already existed. So as a first step, we always load the business component variable we want to work on. For inserting a line, a variable of the business component type of the lines is created. New memory space is reserved. A value is assigned to all the elements of the line corresponding to attributes of the table to which we want to give a value. Those not assigned will be null or empty. And then the line is added to the collection of lines. This addition is also for the sake of reference. So we must be very careful to use the new to create new memory before working with each line. The removeByKey method is available for the deletion, which receives by parameter the identifier of the line to be deleted. And finally, to be able to modify some attribute or attributes of a line, we have the getByKey method of the line collection, which also receives by parameter the ID of the line we want to obtain. This method returns a reference to the business component corresponding to that line. So, we must assign the method to a variable of that type. Then, when changing the variable, we will already be changing that item in the collection. To insert a new header and its lines, for example, the city tour 2, assuming it didn't exist, we start by defining the business component variable and assigning it new memory. Then we assign values for all the elements that correspond to non-inferred header attributes or formulas. Then we create a new memory space for an attraction variable of the business component type of the lines. We assign the values for the non-inferred attributes and add that variable to the collection of the lines of the global business component. We do the same to enter a second line. Note that here, it's mandatory to reserve new memory space, because otherwise, when making the assignments, we'll be overwriting the previous line. We add the new variable to the collection of attractions of the business component, and finally, we execute the insert operation, so that the header and the two lines are inserted in the database. If there were no errors, the variable will be loaded with all the data, the ones we entered, and the inferred data and formula. We've seen how to insert, update, and delete lines in a business component by directly manipulating the collection of lines in the structure. Is this the only way? The answer is no. Remember that data providers are used to return structured data.